January 1875, Montana Territory. The kind of cold that stops a man's breath in his lungs before it can escape his mouth. James Thornton had not cried in 4 years. Not when they lowered his daughter Rachel into frozen ground while a preacher spoke words that meant nothing. Not when he burned her dresses because he could not bear to see them hanging empty in the cabin. Not during the 3 winters that followed, each one colder and longer than the last. Each one a test of whether a man could live when everything inside him had already died. But when he found the child in his barn at 4 in the morning, curled between hay bales with frost forming on her eyelashes, eating oats meant for horses, his hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the lantern. The sound had woken him, a scraping, furtive noise from the barn that could have been rats or raccoons or any of the desperate creatures that sought shelter from a Montana winter. He had pulled on his boots in the dark, checked the loads in his Winchester Model 1873, and stepped out into air so cold it felt like breathing knives. The barn was warmer, not warm, but warmer. The body heat of 3 horses and the insulation of thick log walls raised the temperature just enough that breath did not freeze solid. Jim raised the lantern high and swept it across the interior. Moses, his bay gelding, watched him with calm eyes from the first stall. Delilah, the mare with opinions about everything, flicked her tail in annoyance at being disturbed. And in the back corner, near the feed bin, something small and human-shaped pressed itself against the wall. Jim's first instinct was to speak. His second, stronger instinct was to stay silent. He had learned in 20 years as a Texas Ranger that scared things ran when you made noise. Instead, he moved slowly, each boot placement deliberate, the lantern held steady so the light would not jump and startle. The child was a girl, 9 or 10 years old, though hunger had carved away so much flesh it was hard to tell. She wore a dress that might once have been blue, but was now the color of old smoke and dirt, no coat, a shawl full of holes draped across shoulders that were nothing but bone. Her feet were bare, tucked underneath her body as if she could hide them from the cold. And her hands, purple-white at the fingertips, scooped dry oats from the feed bin into a mouth that chewed mechanically, desperately, like an animal that had forgotten it was human. Jim set the Winchester against a post. The motion made the girl's eyes snap to him, and he saw in them something he recognized from mirrors in the years after Rachel died. The absolute absence of hope, the certainty that mercy was a lie people told. He spoke anyway. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by the cold and something else he could not name. "Don't move." The girl froze. Her eyes, huge and dark in a face too thin, locked on the rifle. She had been crying at some point. The tear tracks had frozen on her cheeks, little lines of ice that cracked when she tried to speak. "Please, mister." The words came out wrong, hoarse, like she had not used her voice in days. "I ain't stealing. I'm just so hungry." "I said, don't move." She went completely still, the way prey animals do when they know running will not help. Jim took another step forward. The lantern light caught more details now. The dress was not just dirty, but torn in 3 places. The shawl had burn marks along one edge. And her feet, God help him, her feet were the color of meat left too long in a freezer. 3 toes on the right foot had gone from purple to a white that looked like candle wax. Jim had seen frostbite before. In the winter of 1863, when his cavalry unit got caught in a blizzard outside Nashville, and half the men lost fingers or toes or worse. He knew what that white color meant. Knew she was hours, maybe less, from losing those toes entirely. "Where are your shoes?" he asked. The question seemed to confuse her. She had expected violence, had braced for it, and did not know what to do with anything else. "Sold them," she whispered. "Last week. For bread." Jim felt something twist in his chest, something he had spent 4 years trying to bury alongside Rachel. "In this weather?" "Yes, sir." He took a breath, let it out slowly, made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to pick you up now. Don't fight me." The girl's eyes went wider, if that was possible. "Wait, boy, because you're dying, and I'm not going to let that happen in my barn." He lifted her before she could argue. She weighed nothing, 45, maybe 50 pounds, all bones and fear and cold. She did not struggle, did not make a sound, just went rigid in his arms like a cornered animal that has given up. The cabin was 200 feet from the barn. Jim covered the distance in less than a minute, kicked the door open with his boot, and carried the child inside. The fire had burned down to embers while he slept, but the cabin still held enough warmth that the girl started shaking the moment he set her in the chair beside the hearth. "That's good," Jim said, kneeling to add wood to the fire. "Means you're not too far gone. Keep shaking." He worked methodically, built the fire back up until flames crackled and heat rolled off the stone chimney in waves. Put coffee on the stove to heat, found his wife's old medical kit in the chest under the window, the one she had used when Rachel got sick. Pulled out clean cloths and the jar of salve that smelled like pine and something bitter. The girl watched him with eyes that tracked every movement, calculating, waiting for the moment when kindness would reveal itself as its opposite. Jim recognized that too, had seen it in beaten dogs and men who had been in prison too long. Trust, once broken completely, did not grow back easily. He filled a basin with lukewarm water. Not hot. Hot water on frozen flesh would do more harm than good. Another lesson from that winter in Tennessee, learned from a surgeon who saved Jim's own frostbitten fingers. "I need to look at your feet," Jim said. "It's going to hurt." The girl bit her lip but extended one leg. Jim took her foot in his hands as gently as he could. The skin was rigid, unyielding. He immersed it in the water and counted to 60 while the girl's breath came faster and faster. Her jaw clenched so hard he could see the muscles jumping. "3 toes got it bad," he said after examining both feet. "Not black yet, though. That's good. You might keep them. And if I don't, then you don't, and you learn to walk different." He looked up at her, held her gaze. "You're not going to die, child. Not tonight. Not in my house." Something flickered in those dead eyes. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest possibility that hope might exist somewhere. Jim wrapped her feet in dry flannel cloths and moved to the kitchen. He had not cooked for anyone but himself in 4 years. Had eaten because a body needed fuel, not because food brought pleasure. But he remembered how to make a meal, how to fry eggs in bacon grease until the edges crisped, how to cut thick slices of sourdough bread and slather them with butter, how to make coffee sweet enough for a child who probably had not tasted sugar in months. He set the plate in front of her and watched her try to eat slowly, watched her hands refuse to obey. She shoveled food into her mouth like it might vanish, like someone might take it away if she did not finish fast enough. The eggs were hot and rich, and they tasted like something from a dream she had forgotten she could have. When the plate was empty, she looked up at him with something like shame on her face. "When's the last time you ate proper?" Jim asked. The girl thought about it, really thought. "Before Ma and Pa died, I guess. That's 4 months." Jim's jaw tightened. He poured her more coffee, added more sugar, set it down without a word. "Where are your folks?" The girl's hand moved to her left arm, instinctive, protective. Jim had seen that gesture before in his years as a Texas Ranger. Seen it on women whose husbands drank too much, on children whose fathers believed in discipline that left marks. "Dead," she said. It came out flat. No emotion. The way you say something when you have said it so many times, it no longer hurts. "Stagecoach robbery. September." September. 4 months ago. "You've been alone since September?" "No, sir. My uncle took me in." "Then where's your uncle?" The girl's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered in those dead eyes, something that might have been anger or fear or both. "He's in town. Silver Ridge. 8 miles from here." "You walked 8 miles, in this cold. No shoes, no coat." She nodded once. "Why?" The anger, if that was what it was, grew stronger. "He said I was eating too much, said he couldn't afford to keep feeding someone who didn't earn their food." Jim's hands curled into fists before he could stop them. "So he threw you out?" "No, sir." Her voice went smaller. "I ran 3 nights ago. 3 nights, in January. The temperature had not been above 0 in a week." "How are you alive?" "Barns mostly. Yours is warm." She looked at the feed bin visible through the open barn door, then back at him. Shame crawled across her face like something physical. "I'm sorry about the oats. I was going to leave before dawn, before you knew. I just..." She stopped, started again. "I was so hungry." Jim lowered the rifle slowly so she could see it was no longer pointed at her. "What's your name?" he asked. Annie Mae Brennan." "How old are you, Annie?" 9, 10 in April. The same age Rachel had been. The same age Rachel would have been if diphtheria had not taken her 4 winters ago, leaving Jim with a daughter-sized hole in his chest that never healed. "Can you walk?" Annie tried to stand. Her legs buckled immediately. She caught herself on the table, face tight with humiliation. "My feet don't work right no more," she admitted. "Since yesterday." Frostbite. Serious frostbite. The kind that stole feeling first, then function, then flesh. Jim made another decision. "I'm going to pick you up again. We're going inside. There's a bed. You're going to sleep in it." "Why?" The question came out sharp with suspicion. "Because you're dying, and I'm not going to let that happen. Not in my barn, and not in my house." He lifted her before she could argue, carried her through the door into what had been Rachel's room. The bed was still made with the quilt his wife had sewn. The window looked out at mountains that glowed pink in the dawnlight. And on the nightstand, in a wooden frame he had carved himself, was a photograph of a girl about Annie's age. Dark hair, smiling. Annie looked at the photograph, looked at Jim. "Who's that?" "My daughter, Rachel. She died 4 years ago, diphtheria. She was 9 years old, same as you." Something in Jim's voice made Annie go still. "I'm sorry." Jim set her down on the bed. The mattress, unused for 4 years, still held the faint scent of lavender sachets his wife had made. Annie's eyes filled with tears she clearly did not want to shed. "You don't have to look at it if you don't want to," Jim said, gesturing at the photograph. "I can take it down." "No." Annie touched the frame with one finger. "She looks kind." She was. Was she brave? Jim thought about Rachel, about how she had been afraid of the dark, of thunderstorms, of the shadows that moved in corners, about how she had cried during the fever, asking why it hurt so much, asking when it would stop, about how she had held his hand at the end and told him not to be sad because she would see him again someday. "She was scared of a lot of things," Jim said finally, "but when it mattered, she had more courage than anyone I ever knew." Annie looked up at him with those two old eyes. "I don't think I'm brave. I just ran. I didn't fight or stand up or do anything good. I just ran." Jim knelt beside the bed so he was at her eye level. "Annie, you walked 8 miles through snow that would have killed a grown man. You slept in barns and ate horse feed and kept breathing when everything in you must have wanted to stop." His voice went rough. "That's not cowardice. That's the bravest thing I've seen in years." He closed the door gently, left her in the quiet room alone, but not unsafe, cold fading from her bones for the first time in months. Annie climbed under the quilt. The sheets smelled like cedar and dust and something else. Lavender, maybe, faint and old from a time when someone had cared enough to make things smell nice. She closed her eyes, did not believe in forever, did not believe in kindness that lasted or promises that held or men who meant what they said. But for tonight, she was warm. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning came gray and silent. Annie woke confused. The ceiling was wrong, the bed was too soft. The air smelled like wood smoke and coffee instead of hay and horse. For one terrible moment, she thought she had imagined everything. The barn, the food, the man who had carried her inside like she mattered. Then she heard him moving in the kitchen, the scrape of a pan on the stove, the crack of eggs against cast iron. Real sounds from a real person in a real place. Annie sat up slowly. Her feet screamed when they touched the floor, but they held her weight, barely. She made it to the kitchen door and stopped there. One hand braced against the frame. Jim was at the stove, with his back to her, cooking eggs again, bacon, the good kind, thick cut, sizzling in its own fat. The coffee pot bubbled on the back burner. He did not turn around when he spoke. "Sit. Don't put weight on those feet more than you have to." Annie sat. He brought her a plate, twice as much food as last night. She stared at it. "I can't eat all this." "Then eat what you can." He sat across from her with his own plate, smaller than hers. "Your body needs rebuilding. Going to take time." They ate in silence for a while. Annie tried to pace herself, failed, shoveled food into her mouth like an animal. When the plate was empty, she felt shame burn hot in her chest. Jim refilled her coffee, added sugar without being asked. I want to work, Annie said finally. Whatever you need done. I'm good with animals. Pa used to say I had a gift with horses. Did he now? He bred them before the robbery, had a whole string of Mustangs he was breaking for the cavalry. Her throat tightened despite her best efforts not to let it. They took everything. The horses, the money, Ma's wedding ring. She looked at her hands. Pa tried to stop them and they shot him. Then Ma because she was screaming. Jim set down his fork. I'm sorry, Annie. Everyone's sorry. The words came out harder than she meant. Doesn't bring them back. No, it doesn't. They sat in the quiet. Outside, the first real light of dawn turned the snow-covered mountains from gray to gold. Your uncle, Jim said carefully. Victor Brennan, the one who owns the apothecary in Silver Ridge. Annie's hand moved to her left arm again. That same protective gesture. You know him? No oven. Sells medicine to miners who can't afford real doctors. Charges twice what it's worth. He's not a good man. No, he's not. Jim paused. But he's your legal guardian. Has papers signed by a judge. Says you belong to him until you're 18. Annie's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Papers don't mean he owns me. No, they don't. Jim stood, walked to the window, stood there with his shoulders tight, looking out at land he had worked alone for 4 years. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to sleep in a real bed tonight. Tomorrow, you're going to eat breakfast. Day after that, we'll figure out what comes next. What about Uncle Victor? He won't find you here. But if he does? Jim turned around. His face had gone hard in a way it had not been before. Then he'll answer to me. Annie searched his face for the lie. For the moment when kindness would turn to something else, she could not find it. Why are you helping me? She whispered. You don't even know me. Jim was quiet for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Pain, old and deep. I had a daughter, he said. Rachel. She died 4 years ago. Diphtheria. I tried everything and I couldn't save her. He paused, swallowed hard. I couldn't save her. But I can save you, if you'll let me. Annie felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared this won't last. That I'll wake up and it will all be gone. I know. I'm scared he'll come and you won't be able to stop him. I know that too. Jim crossed back to her, knelt down so they were eye to eye. Listen to me, Annie. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen again. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise I'll be here when it does. Every storm, every setback, every dark day that makes you want to give up. I'll be right here. Annie threw her arms around his neck. He held her while she cried for the first time in 4 months. Held her while years of fear and hunger and pain poured out in sobs that shook her whole body. Held her until the tears stopped and she could breathe again. When she finally pulled back, her voice was steadier. Can I see the horses? Jim almost smiled. You can see the horses. The barn was warmer in daylight. Moses nickered softly when they entered. Delilah flicked her ears but did not come to the stall door. And in the back, in the last stall, a black mare paced, head high, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white. That's the one without a name, Jim said. Brought her in last month. Wild as they come, can't get near her without her trying to kill something. Annie moved closer. The mare's ears flicked toward her. Pinned back warning. Don't, Jim said sharply. She'll take your fingers off. What's her name? Doesn't have one yet. Annie studied the horse. The way she moved, all contained energy, all fear masquerading as anger. She's not mean, Annie said. She's scared. Scared horses are dangerous horses. So are scared people. Annie looked at Jim. But you still let me in. He was quiet. Can I try? Annie asked. Not today, my feet won't hold me, but when I'm better, can I try with her? Jim looked at the wild mare, then at the girl. Two creatures with more broken than whole between them. We'll see, he said finally. It was not no. Annie would take it. Annie looked back at the mare one more time before leaving the barn. The horse stood in shadow, black as the night that had nearly killed them both. Midnight, Annie said softly. I'll call you Midnight, because you're dark as the coldest hour. But morning always comes after midnight. The mare's ears flicked forward, listening. 3 days passed. Annie's feet began to heal. The color came back pink instead of purple. She could walk without wincing, then without limping, then almost normal if she did not push too hard. She worked because she needed to feel useful, needed to prove she was not charity. Gathered eggs each morning from 6 hens that clucked their disapproval when she reached into their nests. Helped with feeding, measuring oats for the horses, hay for Moses and Delilah, scraps for the chickens. She learned the rhythm of a working farm, the way each day built on the last, the satisfaction of a task done right. Jim taught her to split kindling on the 4th day. Not with strength, he said, positioning her hands on the small axe. With timing. Read the grain, see where it wants to break. Annie swung, the wood split clean. Good, Jim said. The word carried something warm. Again. She split another and another. Her arms ached by the time she filled the basket, but it was a good ache, honest. That night, reading by lamplight from a book of fairy tales she had found on a shelf, Annie asked the question she had been holding back. What happens when he comes? Jim looked up from the harness he was mending. Your uncle. He'll figure out where I am. Someone will talk. Someone always talks. Then we'll deal with it. How? Jim set down his work. The law is supposed to protect children, Annie, even from blood relations who hurt them. The law gave me to him in the first place. She was not wrong. Jim knew she was not wrong. There's a circuit judge coming through next month, he said. Name's Margaret Crawford. Fair woman. Lost her own son years back, so she understands about children. If your uncle tries something legal, we'll counter it legal. And if he tries something not legal, Jim met her eyes. Then I'll handle it my way. Annie did not ask what that meant. She did not have to. On the 7th day, Victor Brennan came to Silver Ridge. Jim had gone into town for supplies. Flour, coffee, the kind of errands that could not wait. He told Annie to stay inside. Bar the door, not answer for anyone she did not know. She obeyed. But when he came back, his face was set in lines she had not seen before. He's here, Annie said, not a question. He's here, staying at the boarding house, asking questions. Jim set the supplies on the table harder than necessary. Half the town's already talking. What are they saying? That you're disturbed, that you ran off because you're troubled, that your uncle's a respectable businessman just trying to do right by his brother's child. Annie's hands clenched. They believe him. Some do, the ones who buy medicine from him, the ones who owe him money, the ones who want to believe rich men over poor girls. Jim's jaw tightened, but not everyone. Ben Calhoun doesn't believe him, nor Doc Cross, nor Reverend Watts, nor Mrs. Adler from the boarding house. She's seen things, knows things. So what do? We wait. He can't take you without a court order, and Judge Crawford won't be here for 3 weeks. Until then, you stay close. Don't go into town. Don't let anyone see you who might talk. Annie looked out the window at the mountains, cold and distant and indifferent to whatever happened in the valley below. I'm tired of hiding, she said. I know. I'm tired of being afraid. I know that too. She turned to face him. If he comes, I'll tell everyone what he's doing. Tell the marshal, tell the judge, tell whoever will listen. I don't care anymore. Something shifted in Jim's face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You got more spine than most grown men I know, he said, but spine doesn't stop bullets. No, but it helps you stand when you've got no business standing. On the 10th day, Sheriff Ben Calhoun rode up to the Thornton Ranch. He sat his sorrel horse with the ease of a man who had spent most of his 60 years in a saddle. A Winchester rested in the scabbard on his saddle. His badge caught the morning light. Jim met him in the yard. Annie watched from the window. Jim. Ben. Got a court order. Custody? Questioning. Judge Crawford wants to hear both sides. Jim's jaw worked. Which judge signed it? Margaret Crawford herself. She's already here. Came early. Wants this done proper. Ben shifted in his saddle. Victor's got papers, Jim. Guardianship signed by Judge Wilson last year after Annie's folks died. According to Montana territory law, blood kin gets priority. He abused her, Ben. Need proof. Doc cross-examined her, wrote her a report, but Victor says the burns were an accident. Annie stepped out onto the porch. Both men turned to look at her. "I'll go," she said. "Annie, sure, state," Jim started. "I'm tired of hiding. If I don't go, he says I'm unstable, that I'm dangerous, that I need to be locked up for my own good." Ben looked at the girl, saw the steel in her spine despite her size. "You're brave, child." "I'm tired, sir. There's a difference." She looked at Jim. "You'll come with me?" "Wouldn't let you go alone." They rode into Silver Ridge 2 hours later. Annie sat in front of a Jim on Moses, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the town grow larger with every step. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Silver Ridge looked the same as Annie remembered. The same muddy main street, the same false front buildings, the same apothecary on the corner, with her uncle's name painted in gold letters above the door. She did not look at it. Ben led them to the courthouse, a 2-story wooden building at the end of Main Street. People stopped to stare as they passed. Annie heard whispers, saw pointing fingers, felt the weight of judgment from strangers who had already made up their minds. She sat straighter in the saddle. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she expected, maybe 30 seats, most of them already filled. Judge Margaret Crawford sat behind a raised bench at the front. Steel gray hair pulled back severe, spectacles perched on her nose. She looked like someone who had seen too much of life's cruelty and refused to look away. And in the front row, Victor Brennan. He turned when they entered. Annie's blood went cold. He looked exactly the same. Same pressed black suit, same gold watch chain, same smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked at her the way he always had, like property, like something he owned. "Ah, mon bad," his voice was smooth as oil. "There she is, my poor, disturbed niece." "Sit down, Mr. Brennan." Judge Crawford's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "This isn't a family reunion." Victor sat, but his eyes never left Annie. Jim guided her to a bench on the opposite side of the room. His hand stayed on her shoulder. Steady, warm. "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Crawford announced. "Not a trial. I'm here to determine temporary custody while we investigate the claims made by both parties." She looked at Annie. "Child, do you understand what's happening?" Annie nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, Mr. Brennan, you filed a report claiming this girl's a runaway and that Mr. Thornton is holding her against her legal guardian's wishes. Is that correct?" "It is, Your Honor." Victor's voice was perfectly calibrated, concerned, hurt. "Annie has been troubled since her parents' tragic death. She requires firm guidance, the kind only family can provide. And you believe you can provide that guidance." "I've tried, Your Honor. God knows I've tried, but she's prone to fabrication, makes up stories about abuse that simply never happened." He shook his head sadly. "It's a symptom of her condition. Doctors have a name for it. Hysteria, they call it." Annie's hands clenched in her lap. "Mr. Thornton." Judge Crawford turned her attention. "You claim the child was abused in Mr. Brennan's care. What evidence do you have?" Jim stood. He was not a man comfortable with words, preferred action, but he spoke clearly. "I found her in my barn 2 weeks ago. 4 in the morning, 20 below, eating horse feed, no shoes, no coat, frostbite on 3 toes, 45 pounds, burns on her arm that didn't come from no stove accident." He paused. "Doc Cross examined her, wrote it all down. Girl was being starved, beaten, worked like a slave." "Those are serious accusations," Crawford said. "They're the truth." Victor stood. "Your Honor, the child burned herself cooking. An accident. I tried to treat it, but she ran away before I could get proper medical attention. As for the rest, she's simply thin. Some children are. And she walked 8 miles in January because she was having an episode. I've been searching for her for 2 weeks." "Sit down, Mr. Brennan." Crawford looked at Annie for a long moment. "I'll hear from the child herself. Annie, approach the bench." Annie's legs shook as she stood. The walk to the front of the courtroom felt like miles. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She stopped in front of Judge Crawford and forced herself to look up. "Child, I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did your uncle ever strike you?" "Yes, ma'am, when I didn't work fast enough." "Did he feed you regularly?" "No, ma'am. Most nights I went to bed hungry. He said food was for people who earned it." Crawford leaned forward. And the burns Mr. Thornton mentioned, and where did they come from? Annie's hand moved to her left arm. She looked at Victor. He stared back, and in his eyes she saw the threat, the promise of what would happen if she spoke. She pulled up her sleeve anyway. The courtroom went silent. The scar was ugly, pink and puckered, shaped unmistakably like the end of a fire iron. 3 weeks of healing had not softened it much. He did that, Annie said. Her voice did not shake. Because I dropped a bottle of laudanum. He said I owed him $3. Said I'd remember the debt better if it hurt. Victor shot to his feet. Your Honor, the child is lying. She's mentally unwell. She harms herself for attention and then blames others. Sit down, Crawford's voice cracked like a whip. Victor sat. The judge studied the burn, studied Annie's face, studied the courtroom full of people, half of whom still looked skeptical, half of whom looked horrified. Mr. Brennan, this is a serious accusation. Do you have anything to say? It's all lies, Your Honor. The girl is disturbed. Everyone who knows me can attest to my character. A voice spoke from the back of the courtroom. I have information, Your Honor. Everyone turned. Mrs. Adler, who ran the boarding house, stood slowly. She was 58 years old with flour still dusting her apron and tired eyes that had seen too much. Speak, Crawford said. I run the boarding house where Mr. Brennan is staying. 3 nights ago, I saw him meet with a man, Jed Rollins. From Denver, they talked in Mr. Brennan's room. The walls are thin. I heard them discussing prices. For girls, young girls, $200 each, they said, for workers in the mining camps. The courtroom exploded. Voices raised, people standing. Judge Crawford's gavel cracked 3 times before silence returned. That's a very serious allegation, Mrs. Adler. I know what I heard, Your Honor. Crawford looked at Victor. His face had gone from red to white. Mr. Brennan, do you know a man named Jed Rollins? Your Honor, this is absurd. I'm a respectable businessman. I would never answer the question. I may have met someone by that name in the course of business, but certainly not for anything illegal. Crawford was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her gavel. This court finds sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation. Until that investigation is complete, Annie Mae Brennan will remain in the temporary guardianship of James Thornton. Furthermore, Victor Brennan is prohibited from approaching the Thornton homestead or contacting Annie directly. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The gavel fell. This hearing is adjourned. We reconvene in 3 weeks for final determination. Annie's knees almost gave out. Jim was at her side instantly, steadying her. You did good, he murmured. Real good. But Annie was not looking at him. She was looking at Victor. Her uncle stood slowly, straightened his vest, adjusted his watch chain. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only Annie could hear. 3 weeks, he said. Enjoy them, because when this is over, you're going to wish you died in that barn. He walked out without looking back. Annie started shaking and could not stop. Outside the courthouse, the cold hit like a physical blow. Annie gulped air, trying to steady herself, but her lungs would not cooperate. The words kept echoing in her head. 3 weeks. Enjoy them. You're going to wish you died in that barn. Jim's hand stayed on her shoulder. Solid, real, the only thing keeping her from collapsing entirely. Sheriff Ben Calhoun followed them out, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Behind him came Doc Nathan Cross, a man of 55 years who had cut bullets out of Confederate and Union soldiers alike at Shiloh and Gettysburg, who had learned that pain was democratic and suffering knew no allegiance. And behind Doc Cross, Reverend Samuel Watts, 65 years old with a face weathered by Montana winters and a heart softened by losing his own son at Antietam. Ben reached them first. His hand rested on the grip of his Colt single-action army, not from threat, but from habit. 20 years as a Texas Ranger taught a man that safety was an illusion and preparation was survival. Jim, he said. His voice carried the weight of friendship forged in younger, bloodier days. Be careful. Victor's got connections in Denver. Man named Jed Rollins. Dangerous type. I know dangerous men, Ben. Not like this one. Rollins runs girls to mining camps. Bought and sold like cattle. If Victor's dealing with him, Ben did not finish the sentence. Did not need to. Doc Cross stepped forward. He carried his medical bag the way some men carried crosses, a burden he could not set down. "I'll write a detailed report," he said. "Send it to the territorial marshal in Helena. What Victor did to this child." His jaw worked. "There are laws, even out here." Reverend Watts placed a weathered hand on Annie's head. She flinched before she could stop herself. He did not pull back, just kept his hand there, gentle and patient, until she stopped shaking. "The community is divided, Jim," he said, "but truth has a way of winning, eventually." Mrs. Adler appeared from the crowd that had gathered, her apron still dusted with a flower, her eyes bright with something that might have been anger or righteousness or both. "Mr. Thornton," she said, pulling Jim aside. Her voice dropped low. "I heard more. After the meeting I testified about, Victor hired Rollins for a specific job, not just Annie, a list. 3 girls total, $500 for the lot, and Rollins is coming here, to Silver Ridge, this Friday." Jim went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "Friday, that's 4 days. 4 days to catch them red-handed." Mrs. Adler's voice hardened. "4 days to put Victor Brennan where he belongs." Jim looked at Ben. The sheriff's face had gone grim. "We'll need a plan," Ben said. "We'll need more than that." That night, 4 men gathered around Jim's kitchen table. A map of Silver Ridge spread between them, corners held down by coffee cups that had long since gone cold. The fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, the temperature dropped toward 0. Jim traced a finger along Main Street on the map. "He'll meet at the apothecary, back door, 9 o'clock most likely, after the town's asleep." Ben leaned forward. He had changed from his sheriff's clothes into something darker, less official. The Winchester across his knees was a Remington rolling block, 50-70 caliber, the kind of rifle that could drop a buffalo at 300 yards or punch through a door at 20 feet. "We catch them in the act," Ben said. "Money changes hands. That's when we move." Doc Cross sat quiet in the corner. He was not a fighting man, never had been, but he knew how to patch holes in bodies that other men put there. And he knew that sometimes violence was the only language evil understood. "According to Montana Territory Law, 1864, Doc said, human trafficking is a capital offense, death by hanging." Reverend Watts stared into his coffee. "I should not be here," he said quietly. "A man of God should not participate in planning violence." "Violence is already planned," Jim said. "We're just deciding who bleeds." The Reverend looked up. His eyes were older than his face. "My son died at Antietam, 17 years old, bullet through the throat, bled out in a ditch while both armies marched over him." He paused. "I prayed for peace that day. God did not answer, so I learned that sometimes peace must be taken by force." He stood. "I'll watch the north approach, make sure no one interferes." Jim studied the map again. His finger moved from building to building. "Livery stable here. 2nd floor has a view of the back door. Ben and I take position there. Doc, you stay in the alley with your medical kit, just in case." "And the girl?" Doc asked. "Annie stays at the ranch. Door barred. Henry rifle loaded." "She won't like that." "She doesn't have to like it." Ben traced the escape routes with his own finger. "If it goes wrong, they'll run. Probably south toward the river. We'll need men there." "I can get 2 deputies," Jim said. "Good men, veterans. They'll hold." The planning went on for another hour, positions marked, signals agreed upon, contingencies mapped. It was the kind of work they had done 20 years ago in Texas, hunting outlaws through mesquite and sand. The years had added gray to their hair and ache to their joints, but the knowledge remained. How to set a trap, how to close it, how to make sure the prey did not escape. When the others had gone, Annie emerged from her room. She had been listening. Jim knew she had been listening. "You can't keep me out of this," she said. "I can and I will. It's about me. Which is exactly why you're staying here." Annie's jaw set in that stubborn line Jim had come to recognize. "He threatened me, said I'd wish I died. I want to see his face when you catch him." Jim knelt so they were eye level, took her shoulders in his big scarred hands. "Annie, if something goes wrong, if bullets start flying, I need to know you're safe. I can't do what needs doing if I'm worried about you." "I can help." You can survive. That's how you help, by staying alive. He stood. I'm going to teach you something. Starting tomorrow. Something your pa would have wanted you to know. What? How to shoot. The next morning dawned clear and bitter. Jim led Annie out past the barn to where the land opened up into a meadow that ran flat for 200 yards before rising into pine-covered hills. He carried a rifle Annie had not seen before, smaller than his Winchester, lighter. Henry repeating rifle, he said, handing it to her. 44 rimfire, weighs 9 pounds. Your pa probably used something similar. Annie took it. The wood was smooth, worn by hands that had held it before hers. Lighter than a Winchester, Jim continued. Easier for someone your size to manage. Less kick, too. He showed her how to load it, how to work the lever action, how to check that the chamber was clear. 4 rules, he said. Treat every gun like it's loaded. Never point it at anything you don't want to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Be sure of your target and what's behind it. He set up tin cans on a fallen log 50 feet away. Stance first, feet shoulder width, right foot slightly back. Turn your body at an angle. Makes you a smaller target and gives you better stability. Annie mimicked his position. Good. Now bring the rifle up. Stock tight against your shoulder, not on top, against. The kick goes back, not up. If you do it right, it won't hurt. She pressed the stock where he showed her. Sight down the barrel, 3 points of alignment. Back sight, front sight, target. The front sight should be sharp. The back sight and target will be a little blurry. That's normal. Annie squinted down the barrel. Breathing, this is important. You can't hold your breath. Your body needs oxygen. Instead, breathe natural. When you're ready to shoot, breathe in, let half out, hold. That's when you squeeze the trigger. Squeeze? Don't pull, don't jerk. Squeeze. Steady and smooth, like you're squeezing a lemon, but you don't want the juice to squirt. Annie tried. The rifle boomed. The kick drove into her shoulder, not as bad as she feared, but enough to make her gasp. The can stayed exactly where it was. Again, she worked the lever, ejected the spent casing, chambered a new round, boimed, breathed, squeezed. The can jumped off the log. There, Jim said, something like pride colored his voice. Do that 9 more times. They spent 3 hours in the meadow. By the end, Annie could hit a can at 75 feet more often than she missed. Her shoulder ached. Her ears rang despite the cotton Jim had given her. But her hands were steady and her eyes were clear. You're a natural, Jim said as they walked back. I'm angry. Anger helps, if you know how to use it. That afternoon, while Jim rode into town to coordinate with Ben, Annie went to the barn, to the last stall where the black mare paced endlessly, eyes rolling, ears pinned. Annie stood outside the stall for a long time, just stood, breathing, being present. The mare watched her with deep suspicion. I know what it's like, Annie said quietly, to be scared all the time, to think everyone wants to hurt you. The mare snorted, stamped once. I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. I just want to stand here, that's all. She stood for 20 minutes, said nothing more, just breathed and existed in the same space. When she finally walked away, the mare's ears were no longer pinned flat. Progress. Thursday passed in tense preparation. Jim cleaned his Winchester, oiled the action, loaded 15 rounds, and checked each one for defects. He sharpened his knife on an Arkansas stone, the blade singing as steel met stone in long, deliberate strokes. Filled his canteen, rolled cigarettes he would not smoke but might want later. Annie watched him work with the focused intensity of someone preparing for war, because that was what this was. A small war, but war nonetheless. Friday came cold and clear. At 6 in the evening, Jim saddled Moses, checked the loads in both the Winchester and his Colt Peacemaker, looked at Annie standing on the porch, the Henry rifle in her hands. Remember what I said? Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone I don't know. If someone tries to break in, shoot through the door first. Ask questions after. And if I'm not back by dawn, ride to Ben's house. Don't stop for anything. Jim swung into the saddle, looked down at her, this girl who had stumbled into his barn 2 weeks ago and reminded him that hearts, even broken ones, could still beat. I'll come back, he said. Promise? Promise. He rode towards Silver Ridge as the sun touched the mountains and turned the snow orange, then pink, then purple. The temperature dropped. His breath and Moses's breath came out in white clouds. The rifle was cold even through his gloves. Silver Ridge at night was a different creature than Silver Ridge by day. The respectable people locked their doors and stayed inside. The miners came down from the hills with money to spend and thirst to quench. Music spilled from the saloon. Laughter, rough and loud. The smell of whiskey and tobacco and unwashed men. Jim avoided Main Street, took the back way to the livery stable. Ben was already there, invisible in the shadows of the second-floor loft. Doc Cross waited in the alley north of the apothecary, his medical bag at his feet. The two deputies Ben had recruited held position at either end of Main Street, blocking the escape routes. Everyone was in place by 8:30. The wait was the hardest part, always had been. In Texas, hunting bandits through the brush country, the waiting was what tested you. Not the shooting. The shooting was simple. Point, squeeze, repeat. But the waiting required discipline, required control. Jim's hands were steady on the Winchester. At 9 o'clock, 3 riders came down Main Street. They did not hide, did not slink, rode in like men who owned the night and feared no consequence. Jed Rollins was easy to identify. The scar that ran from his eyebrow to his jaw caught the lamplight from the saloon. He wore a long black coat and a Remington 44 on his hip. The 2 men with him were harder types. One carried a shotgun across his saddle. The other had a Bowie knife that looked like it had been used for more than cutting rope. They dismounted at the apothecary's back door, tied their horses, rolled cigarettes, and smoked while they waited. At 9:15, the door opened. Victor Brennan stepped out, carrying a lantern. He looked nervous, kept glancing up and down the alley. From his position in the loft, Jim could hear every word. "You're late," Victor said. "We're exactly on time." Rollins's voice was flat, no emotion, the voice of a man who had done terrible things so many times they no longer registered. "Where's the merchandise?" "Being brought from the boarding house now." "3 girls, like you said?" "Yes, 200 for my niece, young, strong, will last years in the camps. The other 2 are older but still good, 150 each." Jim's finger moved to the trigger guard. "Not inside, not yet, but close." "That's steep," Rollins said. "Quality costs. These aren't used goods, these are fresh." Rollins pulled out a leather pouch, counted bills by the light of Victor's lantern. "450, final offer." Victor hesitated only a moment. "Deal." The money changed hands, $450 in territorial scrip. Victor counted it carefully, lips moving. Smiled that oily smile. Ben's voice came low from beside Jim. "Now, when go." The livery door crashed open. "United States Marshal, nobody move." 3 things happened simultaneously. Rollins went for his gun. One of Ben's deputies fired his shotgun. Double-aught buckshot at 15 yards. Rollins went down, clutching his shoulder, the Remington falling unfired. The man with the shotgun tried to run. Jim's Winchester barked once. The man's leg buckled. He hit the ground hard, screaming. The third man, the one with the knife, actually managed to draw it. Got 3 steps before Ben's rifle butt caught him across the temple. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Victor ran. Jim was already moving. Dropped from the loft and hit the ground running. Victor was 45 years old, soft from years behind a counter. Jim was 52 but had been splitting wood and working a ranch for 4 years. The gap closed fast. Victor turned down an alley. Jim followed. Could hear Ben shouting behind him. Could hear Doc Cross yelling for someone to get bandages. But all of that faded into background noise. All that mattered was the man ahead of him who had burned a child and tried to sell her like livestock. The alley opened onto a side street. Victor turned toward the livery stable, toward the horses. If he reached them, this got complicated. Jim raised the Winchester, fired once over Victor's head. The bullet sparked off brick 3 inches from Victor's ear. The man froze. "Don't move." Victor's hands came up slowly. He was breathing hard. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. "Jim, please. We can talk about this. I have money. Lots of money." "Turn around." Victor turned. His eyes were wild, desperate. "You don't understand. Those mining camps, They pay premium for workers. I was just trying to make a living. That's all. Just business. You were selling a child. She's my niece. I have legal rights. Jim stepped closer. The Winchester's muzzle was 3 feet from Victor's chest. You burned her, starved her, tried to sell her to a man who would have worked her to death in a hole in the ground. And you're talking about legal rights. For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing, steam rising in the cold air. Then footsteps behind Jim, Ben's voice. Let him go, Jim. He touched her, and he'll pay for it in court, the right way. The right way put her in his custody in the first place. I know, but killing him now makes you the criminal. And Annie needs you alive and free, not dead or in prison. Jim's finger tightened on the trigger, loosened, tightened again. Finally, he lowered the rifle. Ben stepped forward, grabbed Victor by the collar, spun him around and pressed him against the wall, pulled out iron shackles that had held men for murder, for robbery, for crimes that made decent people sick. Victor Brennan, Ben said, snapping the shackles closed, you're under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, assault on a minor, and about 6 other charges I'll remember on the way to the jail. He yanked Victor toward Main Street where a crowd had gathered. Miners and shopkeepers and decent people who had believed Victor was one of them, who had bought medicine from him, who had thought respectability meant decency. They saw him now in chains, saw the fear on his face, saw what he truly was beneath the suit and the smile. Someone started clapping, then another, then dozens. The sound rolled down Main Street like thunder. Annie had disobeyed orders. Of course she had. She was 9 years old and brave and stubborn, and she had ridden into town on Delilah, the Henry rifle across her saddle, just in time to see her uncle drag past in chains. Their eyes met, Victor's and Annie's. For one long moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The man who had hurt her and the girl who refused to stay hurt. Then Annie smiled, small, cold, the smile of someone who had won. Victor looked away first. 3 days passed like a held breath, slowly released. Victor sat in the territorial jail awaiting transport to Helena for trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Ledgers showing medicines watered down and sold at double price. Letters detailing deals with the Denver gang. Most damning, a detailed plan in Victor's own handwriting. Sell niece, $200. Jed Rollins' contact. The town that had been divided now swung hard the other way. Guilt, maybe, or shame, or just the human need to be on the right side after being wrong. People came to the Thornton Ranch, brought food, apologized, offered help that Annie neither needed nor wanted, but accepted anyway because Jim said that was what gracious people did. Doc Cross came on the 4th day, examined Annie again, made notes in a leather journal he carried everywhere. Gained 8 pounds, he said, writing. Frostbite healed completely, all toes intact, burn scarring but not infected. Psychological state. He looked at Annie over his spectacles. How are you sleeping? Better? Nightmares? Sometimes. That's normal. Might last for years. But you're healing, Annie, body and soul. That's all anyone can ask. He closed his journal. The law works slow, but it works. Victor Brennan will hang, probably by summer. Annie felt nothing at the news. No joy, no satisfaction. Just an emptiness where fear used to live. That afternoon, a stranger rode into Silver Ridge. Jim was at the Mercantile buying nails when he saw the man. Thin, weather-worn, dressed in dusty trail clothes. He moved with the economical grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. His eyes swept the street, cataloging everything, missing nothing. He stopped Jim outside the store. Mr. Thornton? That's right. Name's Silas Granger. I work for Mr. Hayes. Jim's hand drifted toward his Colt. Don't know any Hayes. Not Victor Hayes, his brother. Daniel Hayes, the eldest. Jim went very still. Granger pulled documents from his saddlebag, unfolded them with hands that had rope scars across the palms. Legal challenge to the guardianship proceedings. Daniel Hayes is the closest living blood relative to Annie Mae Brennan. He's claiming custody and land rights to the homestead her parents owned. 160 acres filed under the Homestead Act of 1862. He held out the papers. Jim did not take them. Court's been notified, Granger continued. New hearing scheduled. 10 days from now, Daniel's on his way from Nevada. Should arrive within the week. This can't happen. Already has. Judge Crawford ruled based on the information she had, which didn't include Daniel Hayes' existence. Funny how Victor never mentioned he had a brother, almost like he had something to hide. Granger mounted his horse. Looked down at Jim with something that might have been pity. Daniel's a rich man, Mr. Thornton. Made his fortune in the Comstock lode. When rich men want something, they usually get it. Just the way of things. He rode off before Jim could respond. Jim stood in the street holding documents he had not wanted to touch, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet the way it had when Rachel died, and he learned that safety was an illusion and loss was the only constant. He rode home fast. Annie was in the barn with the black mare when Jim found her. The mare had let Annie into the stall now. Let her run gentle hands down the long black neck. Let her whisper secrets that horses understood better than people. Annie, she turned, saw his face, knew immediately that something had changed. What's wrong? Jim told her. All of it, the brother, the claim, the hearing in 10 days. Watched her face go through shock, then denial, then finally a weary acceptance that broke his heart. Not again, she said quietly. Please not again. I know. I can't go back to that. I can't be owned by someone else. I can't. You won't. How? You said the law favors bloodkin. Jim had no answer. Not yet. That night, Sheriff Ben Calhoun came to the ranch with a thin file he had obtained through his network of lawmen scattered across the territories. The file on Daniel Hayes. They spread it on the kitchen table. Read by lamplight. Daniel Hayes, born 1817, 58 years old, eldest son of William and Mary Brennan, left Montana in 1859 following the Pikes Peak Gold Rush west, ended up in Nevada, made his fortune in the Comstock lode, one of the richest silver strikes in American history. Current estimated worth, $200,000. A staggering sum, more money than most men saw in 10 lifetimes. He doesn't need Annie, Ben said, not for money. Then what does he want? The land, Ben pointed to another document. A survey map showing property lines and proposed railroad routes. Northern Pacific is planning to run a line through this valley within 5 years. Whoever controls that 160 acres controls access. Right-of-way fees, easements, development rights could be worth $100,000 or more over the next decade. Jim stared at the map, at the small parcel that represented everything Annie's parents had built, everything they had died trying to protect. So he wants the land, and Annie is just the key to getting it. That's my guess. How do we fight it? Ben leaned back, lit a cigarette. The smoke curled blue in the lamplight. Prove he's unfit. Prove he only wants the money. Prove he doesn't actually care about Annie. He paused. Problem is, he hasn't done anything wrong. Not like Victor. He's just a businessman exercising his legal rights. Jim was quiet for a long time. What if Annie proves she belongs on that land? How? The old way? First furrow ceremony. Ben blinked. That's just tradition. Tradition has weight, especially out here. If Annie can show the whole town she can work that land, that she understands it, that she belongs there. Jim's voice grew stronger. Maybe that matters more than blood. It's not legally binding. No, but it might sway Crawford. Give her reason to look closer at Daniel's motives. Ben stubbed out his cigarette. It's a long shot, Jim. It's the only shot we have. The next morning, Annie found Jim in the barn. He was examining an old plow, running his hands over wood worn smooth by years of use. Her father's plow, the one Thomas Brennan had used to turn virgin soil into farmland. What are you doing? Annie asked. Checking this, making sure it still works. Why, man? Jim looked at her. How do you feel about traditions? He explained the first furrow ceremony. How it dated back to Europe, carried over by settlers who understood that working land created a bond deeper than any document. How the first cut of spring, the symbolic opening of earth for planting, was witnessed by the community and blessed by the church. How it was not law, but something older and stronger than law. If you can show everyone you can work that land, Jim said, really work it, with your own hands, then maybe Crawford gives more weight to your claim than to Daniel's papers. I'm 9 years old. I don't know how to plow. You'll learn. He spent the afternoon teaching her. hitched Moses to the plow, showed her how to grip the handles, how to read the soil, how to let the blade bite at the right angle, how to walk steady, neither too fast nor too slow, letting the horse set the pace. Annie's hands blistered after 10 minutes. After 30, they bled. After an hour, Jim made her stop. Enough for today. We've got time to build up your strength. Do we? Jim looked toward the mountains where Daniel Hayes was riding even now, coming to claim what he believed was his. We'll make time. Daniel arrived on the 7th day. He rode a tall, sorrel horse with silver trim on the bridle, wore a suit that had cost more than most men earned in a year. Behind him, Silas Granger and 2 other men who had the look of hired muscle. They found Jim and Annie in the yard. Jim stepped forward, put himself between Daniel and the girl. Daniel dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent decades in saddles worth more than most people's houses. He studied Annie with eyes that calculated value the way bankers calculated interest. "So you're Thomas's girl," he said. Annie said nothing. "You have his jaw, stubborn chin." He took a step closer. Jim's hand moved to his Colt. Daniel stopped. "Easy. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" "To see what all the fuss is about. My brother Victor, he's in jail because of this girl. Lost everything. He deserved worse." "Maybe." Daniel's voice was flat, disinterested. "Victor was always weak, always looking for easy money. I told him years ago that business of his would catch up with him." Annie's hands clenched. "You knew what he was doing?" "I suspected, never cared enough to find out for sure. We weren't close." The casual admission hit harder than anger would have. This man had known his brother was corrupt, possibly evil, and had done nothing. Had let Annie suffer because interfering would have been inconvenient. "So you come now," Annie said, "after everything's done, to take what's left." "I come to claim what's legally mine. Your father was my brother. His property passes to family. I'm family. You're a child. Children don't own land." Jim spoke, his voice hard as iron. "There's a ceremony. First furrow, Annie's going to prove she can work that land." Daniel actually smiled. "A children's ritual means nothing. Then it won't bother you to watch." Daniel studied Jim for a long moment, then looked at Annie. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation maybe, or curiosity. "Fine, when?" "3 days. I'll be there." He mounted his horse, paused. "Mr. Thornton, I respect what you did for my niece, truly. But sentiment doesn't change law, and law says blood family takes precedence. In 3 days, you'll see that pretty ritual means nothing compared to legal documents and money." He rode off, his hired men following. Annie turned to Jim. "He's right. I can't really work that land. Not like a grown man." "No, but you can show you are willing to try. Show you belong there." Jim knelt so they were eye level. "That land was your father's dream, Annie. He filed the claim, worked it, died protecting it. Daniel Hayes has never set foot on it, never turned a single inch of soil, never planted a seed." He took her shoulders gently. "Blood might make you related, but work makes you belong." Annie looked toward the mountains, toward the land her father had claimed under the Homestead Act. 160 acres of possibility that men had killed for and would kill for again. "Teach me," she said. "I will." They had 2 days. 2 days to turn a 9-year-old girl into someone who could convince a community she deserved to keep her inheritance. Jim worked her harder than he had ever worked anyone. Up at dawn, practice with the plow, learn to read the land, understand how frost affected soil, how to tell good dirt from bad, how to judge if ground was too wet or too dry. Annie's hands opened into raw wounds. Jim wrapped them each night, salved them with the same pine mixture he had used on her feet. She never complained, just gritted her teeth and went back out the next morning. On the 2nd day, she asked if she could use the black mare instead of Moses. "Oui, ma. Moses is steady. Everyone expects steady. But if I show up on a wild horse, nobody else can ride." She paused. "That says something." Jim considered. "That mare's not fully trained. She could spook, throw you, ruin everything. Or she could show everyone I'm not just a child playing dress-up, that I understand horses the way Pa did." Jim looked at the mare, at Annie, at the connection forming between broken girl and broken animal. All right, and he said, but we practice. Make sure she's ready. They spent the afternoon in the meadow. Annie on the mare's back, no saddle, just a blanket and a rope hackamore. The mare danced and shied at first, testing. Annie stayed centered, calm, spoke in the quiet voice horses trusted. By evening, they were moving together. Not perfectly, but together. The morning of the ceremony dawned cold and clear. Annie dressed in work clothes that had belonged to Rachel, braided the mare's mane with strips of blue cloth her mother had used for quilting. Jim helped her hitch the mare to the plow her father had used. They rode to the Brennan homestead at first light. The crowd was already gathering, 50 people, maybe more. Judge Crawford in her black robes, seated in a wagon at the property line. Daniel Hayes and his men near the front. And behind them, the people of Silver Ridge. Some who believed in Annie, some who did not. All of them curious to see if a child could do what no child should have to do. Reverend Watts stepped forward to begin. Folks, we gather for the first furrow ceremony, he said, his voice carrying across the cold morning air. Tradition holds that whoever works this land, cuts the first furrow of the season, is blessed by one and witnessed by community. Daniel's voice cut through. This is absurd. A 9-year-old child cannot work a farm. Then let her try, Jim said. What are you afraid of? The crowd murmured. Judge Crawford raised one hand for silence. Mr. Hayes, I suggest you watch quietly. The law may be on your side, but there are other considerations, including whether this child has demonstrated the capacity to care for the land her father died protecting. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Annie stood beside the plow, her father's plow, the handles worn smooth by his hands over years of labor. She gripped them with hands wrapped in bandages to protect the wounds that had not yet healed. Looked at the 3 acres of unturned earth ahead of her. 3 acres. By sunset. An impossible task even for a grown man. She clicked her tongue. The black mare stepped forward. The plow blade bit earth, and Annie Mae Brennan began to fight for her future. The morning of the ceremony dawned cold and bright. Annie woke before first light, her stomach tight with nerves and determination. She dressed in Rachel's old work clothes, braided her hair back the way her mother had taught her. Outside, Jim was already hitching Midnight, the black mare, to her father's plow. The first furrow was the hardest. The blade caught on something beneath the surface, a root perhaps, or a rock buried by years of frost heave. Annie's arms strained against the handles, her shoulders burning even before she had covered 10 feet. The plow fought her, resisted, as if the earth itself was testing whether she had the right to cut into it. Then the resistance broke. The blade sliced clean and the furrow opened behind her. Dark soil, rich and black, peeling back like a promise kept. The smell rose sharp and clean, the smell of earth waiting to be planted, to be used, to be transformed from potential into harvest. Annie gripped the handles tighter and kept walking. Jim walked beside her, not helping, not touching the plow, just present. His voice came low, meant only for her. That's it. You're doing it. Read the land. Feel where it wants to give. The black mare pulled steady in front. Her ears flicked back, listening for Annie's voice, for any signal that the weight behind her had changed. When Annie stumbled over a hidden rut, the mare slowed without being asked. When Annie caught her rhythm again, the mare matched it. 20 feet, 50. The furrow ran straight and true, better than Annie had any right to expect. The crowd remained silent, watching, judging, calculating whether this was genuine effort or performance, whether a 9-year-old girl could actually do what she claimed. 100 feet, Annie's hands were screaming. The bandages Jim had wrapped that morning were already staining red where blisters had broken open again. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through the joints. Every breath came harder than the last. She kept walking. 200 feet, the end of the first furrow. Annie turned the plow, lined up for the second pass. The mare turned with her, understanding the pattern now, understanding what was being asked. Behind her, Daniel Hayes shifted his weight. Silas Granger leaned close and said something Annie could not hear. Daniel's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes had changed. He had expected this to be over quickly, expected the child to fail within the first 100 yards, expected to collect his property by noon and be on his way back to Nevada by nightfall. He was beginning to understand this would take longer. By 8 in the morning, Annie had completed half an acre. 6 furrows, each one straight, each one the proper depth for Montana soil in early spring. Her shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the cold. Her legs trembled with every step. But the work was good. Even the skeptics in the crowd could see that. This was not a child playing at farming. This was real work, done properly, by someone who understood what she was doing. Jim offered her water during a brief rest. Annie drank. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the canteen. "You can stop," Jim said quietly. "You've proven your point. Nobody expects you to finish." "He does." Annie nodded toward Daniel. "He expects me to quit, to prove I'm just a child who doesn't belong here." "You have nothing to prove to him." "I have everything to prove to him." She handed back the canteen, gripped the plow handles. The mare stepped forward before Annie even signaled, as if the horse understood what was at stake, as if 3 acres by sunset was a goal they shared. The morning stretched into afternoon. The sun climbed higher, though it brought no real warmth. Annie's world narrowed to the space between her hands and the blade-cutting earth. Nothing else existed. Not the crowd, not Daniel, not even Jim walking steady beside her. Just the work, the rhythm. Step, pull, turn, step, pull, turn. The oldest dance humans knew. The one that separated civilization from wilderness. The one that said, "This land is mine because I have worked it." By noon, 1 acre was complete. Annie's legs were shaking so violently she could barely stand. Her hands had become raw meat wrapped around wood. The bandages Jim had wrapped that morning were soaked through, red spreading across white cloth like a slow bloom. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, for mercy, for this to be over. 2 acres to go. Members of the crowd began to shift uncomfortably. This was taking longer than they had expected. Longer than was entertaining. Some started to leave. Others brought food from town, settled in to watch, made bets on whether the girl would finish or collapse first. Mrs. Adler stood near the front. Her face was wet with tears she was not bothering to hide. Doc Cross kept checking his pocket watch, calculating. At this pace, Annie would finish around sunset. If she did not collapse first, if the mare did not give out, if 100 things did not go wrong, it was the longest shot he had ever seen anyone attempt. At 2 in the afternoon, with 2 acres complete and 1 to go, disaster struck. The plow blade hit something buried deep. Not a root this time. A boulder, large enough that the blade could not cut through, could not push past. The plow stopped dead. The sudden resistance yanked the handles from Annie's grip. She stumbled forward, caught herself, grabbed the handles again. But the damage was done. The black mare, feeling the blade catch, feeling the weight change wrong, panicked. Did what every horse does when something unexpected happens. She bolted forward. 3 steps. 4. Enough to wrench the plow sideways. Enough to twist her front left leg at an angle legs were not meant to twist. The mare screamed, a sound that cut through the cold air like a knife. She went down on her front knees, struggled back up. But when she put weight on that left leg, it buckled. The crowd gasped. Several people stood. This was over. Had to be over. You could not plow with a lame horse. Annie ran to the mare's side, knelt in the dirt, ran her hands down the injured leg. The mare's breathing came fast and frightened. Her eyes rolled white. She tried to pull away. Annie held on. "Easy, girl, easy, let me see." The leg was hot, already swelling, not broken. Annie knew broken. Had seen her father set a gelding's leg once after it stepped in a gopher hole. This was not that. This was a sprain, bad but not fatal. With rest, it would heal. But there was no time for rest, not if Annie wanted to finish, not if she wanted to keep her father's land. Doc Cross pushed through the crowd, knelt beside Annie, examined the leg with practiced hands. "Strained in ligament," he said, "maybe torn. Hard to tell without better light. She needs rest. At least a week." "I don't have a week." "I know." Annie looked up at the mare's face, at the trust that had been building between them over days of patient work, at the fear in those dark eyes. Fear that Annie would ask for something that would cause more pain. "1 more acre," Annie whispered. "Can you do 1 more acre?" The mare's ears flicked forward, listening. "I know it hurts. I know you're scared. But I need you. I can't do this alone." The mare lowered her head. pressed her forehead against Annie's chest, standing on three legs, keeping the injured one curled up and away from the ground. Then she straightened, put weight on all four legs. The injured one trembled, but it held. Annie stood, looked at Jim. We're finishing. Annie, the horse is hurt. She wants to finish. You can't know that. Yes, I can. She walked back to the plow, gripped the handles with hands that were more blood than skin now. The mare limped forward. Each step on that injured leg was agony. Annie could see it in the way the mare's whole body tensed, could hear it in the breathing that came too fast. But the mare pulled. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even Daniel Hayes looked uncomfortable. This had stopped being a property dispute, had become something else, something harder to define. A test of will against circumstance, of determination against impossible odds. Annie cut the first furrow of the final acre at 2:30. The next 3 hours were agony measured out in footsteps and furrows. The mare limped. Annie bled. The sun crawled toward the western mountains with the cruelty of something that knew it held all the power, that knew sunset was coming, whether Annie was ready or not. At 4 o'clock, Judge Crawford stood, walked to where Jim waited at the edge of the field. That's enough, she said quietly. The child has proven herself, more than proven herself. This is beyond what anyone should be asked to do. It's not my decision, Jim said. Then whose is it? Hers. Crawford looked at Annie, at the way she moved like a puppet whose strings were about to break, at the trail of blood drops in the dirt behind the plow, at the mare that should have given up hours ago but somehow kept pulling. She's going to hurt herself permanently. Maybe, but it's her choice. She's 9 years old. 9-year-olds don't get to make choices that destroy them. Jim was quiet for a moment. With respect, Your Honor, 9-year-olds shouldn't have to make these choices at all, but here we are. And the only person who can stop her is her. And she's not stopping. Crawford watched for another minute, then walked back to her seat. Daniel Hayes was no longer smiling. At 5:30, with the sun touching the mountains and the light going golden, the way it only does just before darkness, Annie cut the final furrow. Quarter acre to go, 15 minutes of daylight, maybe less. Her legs were not working right anymore. She stumbled every few steps, caught herself, kept going. The plow handles had worn through the bandages, through skin, down to something that looked like raw meat. Blood ran down the wood, made the handles slippery. The mare was barely moving. Each step a labor, each breath a wheeze. The injured leg dragged now more than stepped, but she was still pulling, still fighting, still refusing to quit even when every instinct must have been screaming to lie down and rest. Silas Granger leaned close to Daniel again, said something urgent, pointed at the sun, at Annie, at the impossible fact that she was going to finish. Daniel's face had gone pale. At 5:45, the sun touched the horizon. The light went from gold to orange to deep red. Shadows stretched long across the field. Cold came down like a hammer. The temperature would drop 20 degrees in the next hour. Annie lined up the final furrow. 200 feet, all that stood between her and victory, between her and keeping the land her father had died for. Her hands would not grip anymore. She looped her arms through the handles. Let the weight hang from her forearms instead. The mare took a step, another. The blade cut earth one final time. 50 feet, 100. The crowd was standing now. All of them, even the ones who had bet against her, even the ones who thought this was foolish or wrong or impossible. 150 feet. Annie could not see straight anymore, could not feel her hands or feet, could not hear anything except the sound of her own breathing and the creak of the plow and the ragged gasping of the mare in front of her. 175 feet, almost there, almost done, almost free. The furrow ended. The blade cut through the last inch of earth and emerged on the far side of the field. 3 acres plowed, every inch of it, by a 9-year-old girl and a lame horse who refused to quit. Annie let go of the handles. The plow fell to the ground with a thud that seemed to echo across the whole valley. She looked up. The sun had dropped below the mountains, but the last light still painted the sky, still counted as daylight, still meant she had finished. 3 acres by sunset. She had done it. Annie tried to take a step. Her legs gave out. She collapsed, felt herself falling, felt the ground rushing up. Jim caught her before she hit, lifted her like she weighed nothing, like she was something precious that could not be allowed to break. "You did it," he said. His voice was rough with tears he was not bothering to hide. "You crazy, beautiful, impossible girl. You actually did it." The crowd erupted, cheering, crying, shouting her name. Even people who had doubted, even people who had bet against her. The sound rolled across the field like thunder. Annie tried to speak, could not. The world was going gray at the edges. She looked past Jim's shoulder, found Daniel Hayes in the crowd. Their eyes met. She smiled, small and cold. The smile of someone who had won. Then darkness took her. Annie woke in her own bed, Rachel's bed. Her bed. The room was dim. Evening light filtered through curtains someone had drawn. Jim sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked like he had not slept, like he had been sitting there watching her breathe for hours. "Did I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "You finished. 3 acres by sunset. You collapsed at the end, but you finished." Jim's eyes were wet. "Every single person there saw it, Annie. Saw what you did, what you're capable of." "Daniel?" Jim held up a document. Official paper with an official seal and Daniel Hayes' signature at the bottom. "He's gone. Signed this before he left. Withdraws all claims to you and the land forever." Annie stared at the paper, at the signature that meant freedom. That meant safety. That meant the land her father had claimed would stay in the family he had built. He just gave up? Not exactly. Jim set the paper aside, leaned forward so his elbows rested on his knees. "Before he left, he came to me, asked to speak private. Said something I think you should know." "What?" "He knew about Victor, about what Victor was doing, had known for years. Got letters about business opportunities that sounded wrong. Ignored them because dealing with Victor would have been inconvenient." Jim paused. "He came here for the land. That part was true. But he also came because he was tired of being a coward, tired of ignoring things that mattered because they were uncomfortable. When he watched you plow that field, watched you refuse to quit even when you should have, he said it showed him what real strength looked like." Jim's voice went rough. "His withdrawal is not just about you winning, Annie. It's about him trying to be less of the man who let his brother hurt a child because stopping it would have cost him something." Annie was quiet for a long time. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's just supposed to be the truth." She closed her eyes, let the information settle. Daniel Hayes had been a coward who found redemption too late to matter, who tried to buy forgiveness with a signature on legal documents. It was not enough, would never be enough, but it was something. "How long have I been asleep?" 2 days. Annie's eyes snapped open. 2 days? Doc Cross said you pushed your body past any limit it should go. Needed rest. Your hands. Jim gestured at Annie's bandaged hands. They looked like white clubs at the ends of her arms. "He had to stitch 3 of the worst tears. Said you'll have scars, but you'll heal." "The mare?" "Midnight is fine. Legs wrapped. Doc says she'll be sound in a few weeks. Gave her to you, by the way. Said any horse that works that hard for someone belongs to them." Annie felt tears start, could not stop them. "I almost killed her." "No, you asked her for something hard, and she chose to give it. There's a difference between cruelty and partnership. You gave her a choice. She made it." Jim reached out, took Annie's bandaged hand in a scarred one. "Victor never gave you choices, just demands. That's why what you did matters. You proved you understand the difference." 3 days later, when Annie could finally walk without her legs shaking, visitors came. Not just 1 or 2, dozens. People from Silver Ridge and the neighboring ranches. People who had watched her plow a field when she should not have been able to. People who understood that what they had witnessed was more than a child proving a point. Mrs. Adler came with bread still warm from the oven. Doc Cross with a detailed report on Annie's injuries and recovery, written in his careful hand for the territorial records. Reverend Watts with a blessing that felt genuine instead of performative. Ben Calhoun with his wife and 3 grown children, all of them wanting to meet the girl they had heard so much about. And at the end of the day, a wagon arrived carrying something large and covered with canvas. Jim and Annie went out to meet it. Tom Cole, the blacksmith, climbed down from the driver's seat. Behind him, his wife Sarah and their two sons. "Got something fine for you," Tom said. He gestured to the wagon bed. They pulled back the canvas. Underneath was a sign, hand-carved from oak. Letters burned deep and clear. Thornton and Brennan Homestead. Annie's place. "Took a few of us working in Foster," Tom said. "Figured both names should be on it. Your father's and Jim's, together." Sarah stepped forward. She was a solid woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by ranch work. "We wanted you to know," she said, "that you're not alone anymore. This community failed you once. We won't fail you again." The sign went up that afternoon, mounted on posts at the entrance to the property, visible from the road, a statement for anyone passing. This land belongs to Annie Brennan, Annie Thornton, both names, both legacies, together. On the 35th day after Annie had stumbled into Jim's barn eating horse feed, Judge Margaret Crawford summoned them to her chambers for the final hearing. The courtroom was empty except for the necessary parties. Victor was in territorial prison awaiting transport to Helena for trial. Daniel had withdrawn his claim. There was no one left to contest. Crawford sat behind her bench, studied the documents in front of her, studied Annie standing next to Jim, her hands still bandaged, her shoulders square. "Annie Mae Brennan," Crawford said. Her voice was formal but not unkind. "The circumstances of this case have changed considerably since our last meeting." "Yes, ma'am." "Victor Brennan has been charged with multiple felonies. His claim to guardianship has been revoked. Additionally, documents recovered from his shop have revealed the full extent of his criminal enterprise." She paused, "including detailed records of his plan to sell you to a mining camp operator." Crawford removed her spectacles, cleaned them with a cloth, put them back on. "The evidence against him is overwhelming. He will not be released before trial. And if convicted, which seems certain, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Possibly face execution." "Good," Annie said. Then, remembering her manners, "Ma'am." Crawford almost smiled. "Daniel Brennan's claim has been withdrawn. His statement, submitted to this court, indicates that you have demonstrated both the capability and the determination to care for the land your father claimed. That is unusual. Most adults cannot demonstrate such things. You did it at age 9. She picked up another document. "James Thornton has petitioned to adopt you, formally, permanently, to make you his daughter in the eyes of the law and the community." Annie's heart stopped. She turned to look at Jim. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Hope and fear mixed together, waiting for her response. "You want to adopt me?" Her voice came out small. "I want you to be my daughter, legal and proper." Jim's voice was rough. "If you'll have me? But I'm trouble. I bring problems. People want to hurt me." "Annie." Jim stepped closer. "I spent 4 years running from grief, hiding from it, telling myself I didn't deserve to care about anyone again because caring meant losing, and I had lost too much already." His eyes glistened. "Then I found a half-frozen girl in my barn who reminded me that living scared isn't living at all. You taught me that. You with your stubborn chin and your brave heart and your refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier." He reached out, took her hand. "I'm not asking because I pity you. I'm not asking because you remind me of Rachel. I'm asking because you're Annie, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears spilled down Annie's cheeks. "I want to say yes," she whispered. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing this. Of losing you. Everything good I've ever had gets taken away. My parents, my home, my hope." She was crying openly now. "What if something happens? What if you get sick or hurt? Then we'll face it together. That's what family does. We don't run from the hard parts. We stand in them, side by side, and we survive." "You promise." "I promise." Annie threw her arms around his neck. He held her while she cried, held her while years of fear poured out in foams that shook her whole body. When she finally pulled back, her voice was steadier. "Yes, yes, I want to be your daughter. Yes to everything." Judge Crawford cleared her throat. Her own eyes were suspiciously wet. "Then by the authority vested in me by the Montana Territory, I hereby grant James Thornton full legal custody and adoption rights over Annie Mae Brennan." She picked up her gavel. Henceforth, you are Annie Mae Thornton. The gavel fell. Annie Mae Thornton. The name rang in her ears like a bell. Welcome to the family, Jim said quietly. She hugged him tighter. That evening, Jim built the fire high, cooked a meal that was more celebration than sustenance. Steak from the last steer he had butchered, potatoes with butter and salt, bread with honey, coffee with cream. They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the first real spring rain began to fall. The sound on the roof was gentle, promising, the kind of rain that made things grow. After dinner, Annie found something on her bedside table. A letter. The handwriting was Victor's. It must have arrived while she was recovering from the plowing. She opened it. Read. The letter was short, poisonous. Victor's final attempt to hurt her by running from prison. Annie, blood runs thicker than circumstance. One day you will understand. One day you will see that you cannot escape what you are. Enjoy your victory. It will not last forever. Your uncle, Victor Brennan. Annie carried the letter to the fireplace. Jim looked up from the chair where he was mending a bridle. What's that? Something that needs to burn. She dropped the letter into the flames. They watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. The last poisonous thread connecting her to Victor Brennan disappearing into smoke. Feel better? Jim asked. Yes, he nodded, went back to his work. Annie sat beside him. They stayed like that for a long time, not talking, just being. Family in the quietest, most permanent sense. That night, alone in her room, Annie found words coming, words she had been holding back, afraid to say them, afraid they would somehow break the spell. She went to the main room. Jim was banking the fire for the night. Papa? He went still. The word hung in the air between them. Annie said it again, testing, making sure it was real. Papa? Jim turned. His face was wet. He did not try to hide it. Yeah, he said roughly. That's right. She ran to him. He caught her, held her like she was something precious that had been lost and found again. I love you, Annie whispered. I love you too, daughter. Spring turned to summer. Annie worked alongside Jim, learning everything he could teach, how to mend fence, how to read weather, how to gentle a horse, how to shoot straight, how to be someone who belonged on this land, not because papers said so, but because work made it true. Midnight healed. The limp faded. By June, Annie was riding her across the meadows, flying over ground that had tried to kill her 6 months ago. The mare ran like something wild and free, like something that had found its purpose. One afternoon in late July, a wagon approached the ranch. Annie was in the barn when she heard it, came out to see a woman she did not recognize. Beside her, a boy, 7 years old, thin, dirty, scared. The woman climbed down, looked exhausted. Is this the Thornton place? Yes, ma'am. I found this boy on the road 2 days back. Won't say his name, won't say where he's from. Someone in town said you folks might know what to do with him. Annie looked at the boy, saw in his eyes what she had seen in her own reflection 6 months ago. Terror masquerading as silence. Hope buried so deep it seemed dead. She approached slowly, knelt so they were eye level. What's your name? The boy said nothing. That's okay. You don't have to tell me. Are you hungry? A slight nod. We have food, good food, and a warm place while you eat. You want to come inside? The boy hesitated, then slowly he reached out. His hand was small and cold and trembling. Annie took it, recognized the fear, recognized the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Jim appeared in the doorway, saw the boy, saw Annie, understood immediately. Bring him in, Jim said. Annie led the boy inside. The cabin was warm, smelled like bread and coffee and safety. The boy's eyes went wide. Jim was already heating soup. I want to help him, Annie said quietly. The way you helped me. That's not a small thing you're asking. I know. She paused. But this place, Annie's place, shouldn't it mean something? Shouldn't it be somewhere lost? Kids can find what I found? Jim looked at the boy, at Annie, at the pattern repeating, the cycle of rescue and healing that could continue if they let it. When did you get so wise, he asked. Had a good teacher. 3 weeks later, the boy told them his name, whispered it one night like a secret he had been keeping too long. Samuel. Annie smiled. That's a good name. Winter came again. 1 year after Annie had stumbled into Jim's barn, she stood at the window watching snow fall on fields that were hers now. Really hers. The adoption papers hung framed on the wall beside Rachel's photograph. 2 daughters, one lost, one found, both loved. Samuel was healing, slowly, learning to trust the way Annie had learned. Jim was patient with him the way he had been patient with her, teaching through action, through presence, through the quiet certainty that some promises, once made, were kept. You ever regret it? Annie asked Jim one evening. They were sitting by the fire. Samuel was asleep in the second bedroom, the one they had prepared for him. Taking me in? Not for a single second. Even when I was difficult. You were never difficult. You were surviving. He paused. There's a difference. Annie leaned against his side. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. 3 people who had been broken were learning to be whole together. Spring would come again. The land would need plowing. Samuel would learn the way Annie had learned. The cycle would continue. Children who needed homes would find them. Land would be worked. Promises would be kept. Annie Mae Thornton stood at the window of her farmhouse, watching the first light of spring touch land saved by stubbornness and hope. Behind her, family stirred. Ahead of her, a future she had earned with blood and tears and refusal to quit. She had come to this place a frozen, starving child with nothing. She was leaving it, not leaving but growing from it, into something her parents would have been proud of, something she was proud of. The land remembered the hands that worked it, and Annie's hands would work this land for the rest of her days, teaching everyone who needed to learn the same lesson she had fought so hard to understand. Family is not blood, home is not a place, hope is not foolish, and love, real love, the kind that shows up when everything falls apart and stays when the storm is over. Love is the only thing that can never be stolen, never be lost, never be taken away. Because once you find it, once you fight for it, once you decide it belongs to you and you belong to it, nothing in this world can break that bond. Not time, not distance, not death, not anything. Annie smiled as the sun rose over the Montana mountains. Behind her, Jim was making coffee. Samuel was waking up. Midnight was stirring in the barn. The sign at the gate read Thornton and Brennan Homestead, Annie's place. And for the first time in her life, Annie Mae Thornton believed in forever, the end.